Imagine you wake up and you cannot see your hand in front of your face. Not dim. Not dark the way a room is dark at night with a sliver of light under the door. Dark the way the bottom of the ocean is dark. The floor beneath you is tilted at an angle it was never supposed to reach. Water is rising around your legs. Cold in a way that doesn't feel like cold at first. It feels like pressure. Like something wrapping around you with both hands. You have no idea what just happened. You have no idea where you are inside the structure you're trapped in. And you have no idea, not even a suspicion, that the 11 people you were sleeping 50 feet away from are already dead. What I'm about to tell you is not a metaphor. It is not a dramatization constructed for this video. Every detail you are about to hear is documented, corroborated, and in large part captured on video by the men who eventually found Harrison Okene. On May 26, 2013, 60 hours after his ship sank to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, a rescue diver descended 30 meters through pitch-black water on what every single person involved, believed was a body recovery mission. What that diver found instead changed every assumption about the limits of human survival. This is the UNLOST FILES, and this is the true story of Harrison Okene. The Jascon 4 was a tugboat. Not glamorous, not large. It was a working vessel, the kind of ship that does the unglamorous labor of the sea, towing oil platforms and barges across the Gulf of Guinea off the coast of Nigeria. 12 men worked that ship. Engineers, deckhands, officers, men with families, men who had done this job many times before on many ships like this one, in these same waters. Harrison Okene was 26 years old. His job title was ship's cook. He had been on the water for years. The sea was not a novelty to him. It was a workplace, a paycheck, a place he was comfortable enough to sleep soundly on a vessel moving through Atlantic waters at 4 in the morning. In the early hours of May 26th, while most of the crew slept in their cabins, Harrison woke up and made his way to the bathroom. That decision, the specific, ordinary, utterly random decision to use the bathroom at 4:50 in the morning, is the reason Harrison Okene is alive today. Because at 4:50 a.m., something hit the Jascon 4 from below. The ship capsized. It did not list slowly. It did not give the crew time to react, to grab a life jacket, to send a distress signal, to reach a hatch or a porthole or any exit at all. It rolled and it went under and it sank straight down. In the time it takes you to read this sentence, the Jascon 4 was on the ocean floor. 30 meters down. 100 feet. Deep enough that no light from the surface reaches you. Deep enough that the pressure of the water above is measurable and constant and inescapable. 11 of the 12 crew members drowned in their cabins. They never had a chance. The water came through every opening at the speed and pressure of a full ocean column behind it. There was no surviving that. Not in a bunk. Not in a corridor. Not anywhere inside that ship except for one place, one specific, accidental, completely random location. The bathroom. Harrison Okene was thrown by the capsize. The world spun. The ship that had been floor beneath feet became ceiling above head. Became wall. Became something that no longer had an orientation he could trust. Water came in. Cold, black Atlantic water, 50 miles from the Nigerian coast. In the dark. He moved. He did not think. There was no time for thought. He moved the way living things move when something in them refuses to stop. He found a hatch. He pulled. He moved through the ship in darkness so complete it was physical. Not the absence of light, but the presence of something else. Something that pressed against his eyes and told him nothing. He moved until the water stopped rising around him. He was in an officer's cabin. The ship had settled with this section partially above the waterline of the flooding. A pocket of air trapped inside an inverted, sunken vessel. A bubble of breathable atmosphere, for feet high. at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Harrison Okene stood in that air pocket, in his underwear, in total darkness, and understood that he was alive. What he did not yet understand was how long alive was going to last. Think about what darkness actually means at the bottom of the ocean. There is no adjustment period. Your eyes will not adapt to this. There is no dim shape, no faint outline, no suggestion of form in any direction. The Atlantic Ocean at 30 meters inside a sunken vessel at 4:51 in the morning is as close to sensory absence as a living human being can experience and remain living. Harrison could not see the water he was standing in, could not see his own hands held in front of his face, could not see the walls of the cabin inches away from him. He could only hear. The hull of the Jascon 4 was not quiet. Steel under ocean pressure talks. It groans and pops and occasionally produces sounds so sudden and sharp they are indistinguishable from a structural failure. Every one of those sounds, in total darkness, was a potential announcement that the air pocket was about to collapse, that the ceiling was coming down, that the water was rising. Harrison could not verify any of it. He could only listen and wait and stand in water that was hovering around 10 to 12 degrees Celsius, cold enough to begin the process of hypothermia within hours, cold enough that standing still was dangerous and moving was the only option, but moving in total darkness in a submerged, inverted cabin meant risking disorientation, risking submersion, risking losing the air pocket entirely. And then there were the other sounds. This is the part of Harrison's story that does not appear in the headline summaries. The part that, when he described it in the days and weeks after his rescue, made the people listening go quiet. The Gulf of Guinea is not a sterile environment. The ocean around the wreck of the Jascon 4 contained what all open water contains, the full catalog of marine life that occupies that depth and that temperature range, including predators. Harrison could hear them. He could hear, through the hull of the ship, the sounds of animals feeding on the remains of his crewmates in the water outside. He could not see them. He could not see anything. But he could hear the difference between the ship settling and something else entirely, and he knew what that something else was. He had worked on boats his entire adult life. He knew the sounds of the Gulf of Guinea. He knew what fed in these waters. He stood in his 4-foot air pocket, in the dark, listening to his crewmates' bodies being consumed on the other side of the hull, and he made a decision. He was going to survive this. He was not passive. This is critical to understanding what Harrison Okene did in that cabin. He did not sit down and wait to die. He moved through the submerged sections of the ship in total darkness, feeling along walls and surfaces, attempting to find anything that could help him. A light source, a radio, an emergency beacon, a way out. What he found at some point during those first hours was a single bottle of Coca-Cola. That Coca-Cola, one bottle, found by touch in the dark at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, was the only caloric and hydration input Harrison Okene would have for the next 60 hours. He rationed it. Not because someone told him to, not because he had survival training, because he was 26 years old and he was going to get home, and he understood at a cellular level that the liquid in that bottle was the difference between a body that could function and a body that could not. There was another problem building invisibly in the darkness. Every breath Harrison took consumed oxygen from the air pocket and replaced it with carbon dioxide. The pocket was sealed. The CO2 was accumulating. Slowly, over hours, the air quality in that cabin was degrading, producing the kind of atmospheric conditions that cause headaches first, then confusion, then unconsciousness, then death. Harrison could not measure this. He had no instruments, no way to assess what he was breathing. What he had was the increasing difficulty of the breathing itself and the specific, disorienting quality of air that is becoming toxic. He stayed conscious. We do not know entirely how, whether it was the size of the air pocket, whether his controlled movements minimized his CO2 output, whether some feature of the cabin's geometry provided marginally better air circulation than a completely sealed space would have. What we know is that after 60 hours at the bottom of the Atlantic, Harrison Okene was still breathing. Barely, but breathing. He prayed. In the interviews he gave after his rescue, Harrison spoke about prayer the way some people speak about oxygen. Not as a spiritual concept, but as a physiological necessity. Something his body required to continue functioning. He sang hymns in the dark. Not loudly. He did not know what was in the water around the hull, did not want to attract anything to the sound, but continuously. Under his breath, in the dark, at the bottom of the ocean. 24 hours passed. Then 36. Then 48. On the surface, the search and recovery operation had been running for 2 days. The word in that sentence is recovery, not rescue. Nobody on that surface vessel believed there was a living person at the bottom. The Jascon 4 had capsized without warning at 4:50 in the morning while the crew slept. 11 bodies, 12 crew. The mathematics were straightforward and grim. The South African diving company DCN Diving had been contracted for a saturation diving operation, a highly technical process required at this depth, where divers live under pressure for days at a time to avoid the repeated decompression cycles that would otherwise make the work impossible. These were professionals operating in conditions that require years of training and equipment that costs more than most people earn in a decade. Their job that day was to retrieve bodies. The lead diver on the operation was Nico van Heerden. He went down attached to an umbilical line, a tethered connection to the surface that carried his gas supply, communications, and a video camera feeding live footage back to the crew above. At 30 meters, visibility is limited to the reach of your dive light. Beyond that beam, nothing. The wreck of the Jascon 4 sat in that nothing, a shape that was recognizable as a vessel only by its geometry. All color stripped by depth and darkness, covered in the fine silt disturbed by 60 hours of settling. Nico van Heerden moved through the wreck the way saturation divers move. Methodically, professionally, with the practiced calm of someone who has done this in conditions most people cannot imagine. He was looking for remains. He expected to find them. He entered the officer's cabin. His torch beam found a hand in the water. Van Heerden reached for it. The instinct of a body recovery mission: locate, secure, document. This was the work. He had done this before. His hand closed toward the wrist, and Harrison Okene's hand grabbed back. On the surface, the crew watching the live feed saw the same thing Van Heerden saw. A hand, then a hand grabbing back. Then, as Van Heerden's light moved upward, a face. A living human face, surfacing from the air-water boundary inside a sunken ship at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, 60 hours after the vessel went under. The surface crew's reaction was recorded. It was not calm. Harrison Okene saw light for the first time in 60 hours. He saw it through eyes that had been in total darkness for so long that even the beam of a single dive torch was overwhelming. He saw, after 2.5 days of absolute blindness, the outline of another human being. In the footage, which exists and is publicly available, you can hear Van Heerden's voice through his equipment. He is speaking to Harrison, telling him he is safe, that they have him, that it's okay. And you can see Harrison's face, the specific expression of a person who has spent 60 hours deciding not to die, suddenly confronted with evidence that the decision worked. Harrison Okene could not simply be pulled to the surface. This is the part of the story that most people, when they first hear it, find almost cruel in its irony. After 60 hours at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, after surviving everything that cabin had done to him, the darkness, the cold, the carbon dioxide, the sounds through the hull, the single bottle of Coca-Cola, the 60 hours of isolation so complete it would have broken most people within the first 12. After all of that, Harrison could not be brought up. The human body, when exposed to elevated pressure over an extended period, absorbs nitrogen into the bloodstream and tissues at a rate proportional to that pressure. At 30 meters for 60 hours, Harrison's body had absorbed enough nitrogen that a rapid ascent to the surface would cause that nitrogen to come out of solution the way carbonation comes out of a shaken bottle, forming bubbles in the blood, in the joints, in the brain. Decompression sickness. The bends. A condition that, at the severity his exposure warranted, could be fatal. The rescue divers equipped him. Breathing equipment. Thermal protection against the cold. Then they guided him to the diving bell, the pressurized transport capsule that would carry him to the surface while maintaining the pressure his body required. He surfaced inside a steel capsule, still under pressure, unable to step out into open air for the first time in nearly 3 days. He was transferred directly to a decompression chamber on the surface vessel. Inside that chamber, under the supervision of the DCN diving medical team, Harrison Okene spent the next approximately 40 hours undergoing controlled decompression, the slow, staged reduction of atmospheric pressure that allows nitrogen to leave the body safely. Meals were passed through a pressurized lock. Communication through a speaker system. The world outside was visible through a small porthole. He had survived 60 hours at the bottom of the ocean. He then spent nearly 2 more days inside a decompression chamber to make sure the survival stuck. When Harrison Okene finally stepped out of that decompression chamber and breathed uncontrolled, unregulated, unfiltered open air, when he felt the sun on his face and the wind and heard the sound of the ocean from above rather than from within, the first thing he asked for was a phone. He needed to call his wife. Harrison Okene gave interviews in the months following his rescue. He spoke about the darkness. He spoke about the sounds through the hull. He spoke about the prayer and the hymns and the single bottle of Coca-Cola and the 60 hours that passed in a space where time had no reference points, no light cycle, no sound cycle, no way to measure the distance between one moment and the next. He spoke about the moment the diver's light came through. He described it as the moment God answered. The doctors who evaluated Harrison after his rescue noted several things that they found medically difficult to explain. The degree of hypothermic exposure he had sustained should have produced deeper physiological deterioration. The CO2 levels in his air pocket, estimated from the pocket size and the hours elapsed, should have produced incapacitation well before the 60-hour mark. His caloric deficit was severe. His psychological state, given the acoustic environment he had been in, the sounds through the hull, and the duration of complete sensory deprivation, should have produced outcomes that it did not produce. He was weak. He was cold. He was dehydrated. He was profoundly traumatized. He was alive, cognitively intact, oriented, communicating. The doctors used the word remarkable. Several of them used it more than once. 11 men did not come home from the Jascon 4. 11 families lost someone in those same waters where Harrison stood in the dark and sang hymns and waited. That fact does not diminish with Harrison's survival. It sits alongside it, as it should, as it must. What happened on May 26, 2013 in the Gulf of Guinea was not a story of luck, though luck was present. It was not a story of superior training or equipment, because Harrison had neither. It was not a story that can be fully explained by any single factor. Not physiology, not psychology, not faith, not chance. It was a story of 60 hours. Of a man who, in the most total darkness a human being can occupy, chose to keep choosing. Harrison Okene later trained as a saturation diver. He went back into the water. This has been UNLOST Files. If this story stayed with you, it should. 11 people lost their lives on the Jascon 4. Their names are part of this story too, even when the story carries only one name in its headline. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Leave a comment with what you found most difficult to imagine, because everyone who hears this picks something different, and that difference says something about all of us. I'll see you in the next one.